Hey guys, and welcome back to another digital painting tutorial where I will be showing you how to make this Halloween bookshelf. Welcome to my channel, Creatively Me with Bree, and you guessed it, I'm Bree. Let's jump in by first going over the dimensions for our canvas. First, press on our Tool Actions button, then select Canvas, Canvas Information. Here is where you can title your work and sign your name. And here are the dimensions we will be working in: 3800 pixels by 5000 pixels at 300 dpi, and the color profile is the default, which is one of the available color profiles second from the top. The amount of layers that we will have to be working in is 31. Let's jump in. So for starters, this is a limited palette. This is the palette that we'll be working in, and that baby pink we will be using on layer 1, slide over and fill that layer. Next, we're going to select a new layer by hitting the plus sign, and we will be grabbing the color black, and we will use the Inka brush, which is under inking. Duplicate that brush, select, and here we are going to make some slight adjustments. Under taper, pressure taper, move those in and slide size all the way to the right. Now hit done. These are the two brushes that I use throughout the piece. This is the original Inka, and this is the amended one. We'll now be deleting that layer and adding a new one. On this layer, we're going to use the Inka brush, and we're going to draw a vertical line on the side of the paper. You can choose to do it exactly as me or vary it. By holding down, you will have the line be perfectly straight. Next, I duplicate this layer and slide that line over just a bit so they're overlapping, so the line is thicker. I have freeform selected and I am on nearest neighbor. Now I will be able to resize or move as needed. Before we go any further, let me show you some tips and information that might be helpful to you for the rest of this piece. First, let's start by duplicating this layer and then hide the layer underneath it so that we have the original. Now we have the transform tool selected, freeform, and nearest neighbor. Notice here how the pixelation doesn't appear blurry while we are using these current settings. Going back to transform tool, going into interpolation, we are going to test out both the bicubic and bilinear so that you can see up close in person how this impacts the ability for the object or the brushstroke to be squashed and stretched, and what that looks like. Every project and every brush will be a little bit different, which is why you should play around with the interpolation, assuming I'm saying that word right, and which one works best with your project. I have noticed with the Inka brush and the texture that comes with it, the nearest neighbor is the best option in order to keep the integrity and the texture of the brush intact. All right, and now that we have that out of the way, we can head back to our original content. So now that we have this layer, we are in fact going to put the alpha lock on. We are going to grab the gray, which is a very dark gray, but we're going to choose it. And we're going to use this to paint in using the amended Inka brush to make the wood grains for the side of the bookshelf. Technically, it's the front of the bookshelf, but I think you get what I mean. If you're having trouble figuring out what your lines should look like, go ahead and look up a reference. All right, and now that we are done, we are going to take off alpha lock, we are going to duplicate, and now we're going to slide that piece on over to the other side, select flip vertically, and then we're going to just make sure that we get this all the way down or as close to the edge of the canvas as possible. If you see that there is a little bit that needs to be stretched, make sure you're on freeform, nearest neighbor, you can just stretch that up a tiny bit. And now we have our two lines started for the bookshelf. I select both layers, move it over so that I feel like they are perfectly, down the center of the canvas, and then I do just a little bit of adjusting. Next, I'm going to add a new layer, the color black, and now we're going to make horizontal lines. Don't forget to hold down so that your line is perfectly horizontal. Now we can duplicate this layer. I do flip it vertically and bring it down just a bit, so that way we can thicken the line. And now I combine those layers. Well, I struggle first, but I do end up doing it. I put that layer beneath the front two like wood pieces of the bookshelf to begin. And then I just duplicate and slide and eyeball. I could do this mathematically. I could use a grid. I decided I didn't really mind just doing this without the grid. I didn't need it to feel perfect. So, but you could absolutely turn on grids and do that. Now it kind of looks like a ladder, right? So we combine all the horizontal lines, and we're just going to real quick decide how we want this bookshelf to look. Do we want it up? Do we want it down at the bottom? At some point, there will be a shelf that does get cut off. So I'm trying to decide where I want that shelf to be. I decide at the top. I take the selection tool, the rectangle, and I press copy and paste and move that line up. By zooming in and out, I can see that it's a little bit too far apart for me from the other shelves, so I end up adjusting it, and now I combine those. Now I can put on alpha lock. I'm going to grab the gray again. I'm going to turn my piece horizontally, and now I can paint each of the shelves individually. The details here really aren't something to stress about too much. We just need this suggestion of wood grain. Majority of the eye will be drawn to the items that are on top of the shelves, hopefully not the wood of the shelves in and of itself. All right, we're almost there. All right, heading back into our layers, we are going to take off the alpha lock, select the pink layer, add a layer on top of that that is beneath the ladder-like shape we have right now. We're going to do the selection tool, use a rectangle, and drag that dark gray in, and now we have the back of our bookshelf. Combine those layers, and now our bookshelf is complete. Well, we built it, we put it together, but now we need to decorate it. We need our decor. And this is where the fun begins. So for the remainder of this piece, I'm going to be, well, pretty silent. I'll chime in when I think it's necessary, but mostly this is up to you how you want to decorate your bookshelf. So you can absolutely copy mine to a T, or you can start getting creative with the items that you would like to see on your own bookshelf. This right here is an orange pumpkin. Next, I do a new layer, and I'm choosing what I would call like salmon, a salmon color. So we got orange and we got salmon right now. And I'm just, placing them, making sure I like the way that it looks, getting the shape just right. Now I'm going in with white on a new layer. And this is where I do the stem of the pumpkin and then create the lines, also known as the ribs of the pumpkin. I learned that this year. I'm very excited to share that knowledge with you. And then once I have my lines down and I like the way that my pumpkins are looking, I end up combining those layers together. And then I add a new layer. Something to note, you can work in as many layers as you feel comfortable, obviously up until the threshold, which is 31 total. But I usually work on separate layers until I feel confident about the design, and then I merge them later. It does make it easier when you're working on less layers, but don't feel rushed to combine anything you're not certain of to begin with. So here I use the teal color to create a vine for the greenery that I want coming down from the bookshelf. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like, at least in my real life, I want plants on my bookshelves. I want plants on my shelves. I want plants interspersed around my decor. And while I have you here, I have to be honest, while this project was not difficult, or at least I found the difficulty quite low, it was very time consuming. It took a lot to fill in the bookshelves. Now, on your own piece, you can of course choose to have less shelves than I did. I made a similar piece, and that one had less shelves, and that one felt a little bit easier to fill. However, I enjoyed the challenge, or at least that's what I keep telling myself. Once I have the vines down, I go to the mint color and I add some lines or stems, spines. I don't know if I'm using the right words, to the leaves, just to create a bit more depth so they're not looking so flat. All right, so first I'm going to add a layer and I'm going to add a book using that same mint green right here. Next, I'm going to choose the salmon pink. There it is. There's my salmon. Since this brush is rather textured, you do need to make sure before you try filling in any object that the edges are completely touching. That is one of the more frustrating or downsides to this brush. However, I thoroughly enjoy the texture, so I find it worth the struggle. Now we're gonna make our little bat. I do a swoop, and then a swoop, 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 and a big swoop, and then smaller swoops. Then I make sure everything's closed before I fill. Next, I grab the selection tool, put it on freehand so that I can select the bat and also use transform, freeform, so that I can move it around and also just slightly squish the shape. I just felt like it was a little too wide and I wanted to push it in just a touch. Now I'm going to create a red little mouth and use white for the teeth that are poking out. Secret vampire. And now I'm choosing the teal and creating a book that has fallen over and is resting and leaning on the other book. I'm just going to clean up the edges and the shape. I take my orange and I make a cute little pumpkin right here. However, I do go in and I select the bat once again and move it over a bit more. These are all on the same layer, which is why I am selecting the bat and moving it over. Now I'm going to select white again and create the stem and the ribs around the pumpkin. Adding a new layer, I'm going to make it a clipping mask. And this is so I can start designing the sides of the book covers, so the spines of the book. I try to keep the colors consistent so that it's very easily read throughout the piece. So while this is our first real stack of books, you'll notice throughout the piece that I use the mint on top of the teal and teal on top of the mint. And then I use the salmon on top of the baby pink and baby pink on top of the salmon. All right, now that we're done heading into our layers, I'm going to combine that entire shelf and add a new layer. And this top layer, we're going to put floral elements on. So these are going to be the smaller detail floral bits. So it'll have white flowers, orange leaves, and salmon colored like oak leaves as well. You'll see soon, I promise. And the center of the flowers will be the salmon color. I keep that consistent throughout the piece, so if you don't know what color I select, now you know. Now I take my teal and I just add a little bit of greenery here and there to add to the floral elements. As I'm drawing, I'm trying to look at the overall balance of colors and shapes, and as well as the space. So, for example, I try to utilize as much space as I can on each shelf without overcrowding it and making it so that we can't see the back at all. So you'll find your sweet spot. Everyone's preference will probably vary, but this is where I felt pretty good. So now we are drawing in that oak leaf using that salmon pink color. Then we use the orange and we make our tree leaf. I don't know what kind of tree leaf. I select black and use that for the stem on the leaves. And now we can begin working on our next shelf by adding a layer and moving that top layer beneath the vines. And now you can see all on one layer right there. Okay? Put those details back on. And those are the vines on our blank layer. Now we can begin to work on shelf 2. Technically it's shelf 3, but it's the second shelf we're working on. So here we are working on our cauldron. What is it brewing, you ask? I don't know, but knowing me, it's probably a love potion. I am a sucker for love and romance. I thought about adding bubbles, but given the size of the cauldron on the shelves, I didn't know if it would be as readable as some swirly mist steam, so we went for the swirly mist steam instead. Next on our shelf is a ghost that apparently is trying to either use magic to brew the love potion on my behalf, or it is trying to scare the potion. Either way, I'm not sure it will find success in its current endeavor. Next, I'm going to grab the salmon, and we're going to start placing our first book on this shelf. Now, while we cannot see the title of this book, I'm going to guess that it is a recipe book for potions. And based on its color, it's clearly a love potion book. Sorry guys, I got started on a side quest of character development in my art piece, and it's just flowing now. And now that we have our randomly sprouting floral elements that apparently just naturally exist on this shelf, we're going to put the books on alpha lock so that we can create the spine of the books with some detail. Now I'm going to select the teal and make sure that I add in some greenery here and there. I'm just making sure that I combine the layers that go together for this shelf. There we go. I unselected alpha lock and added a layer. On this layer, we will be drawing in some more books. I don't know what's inside these. My guess is as good as yours. If you are still here in this tutorial, feel free to tell me down below what you believe is inside these books. Please, let's keep it PC, shall we? Perhaps it is a paranormal romance novel. Or perhaps a hauntingly good biography written by a ghost themselves. Alright, I've run out of ideas. What does this book have in it? It's on the thinner side. So, is this like someone's journal? Is there a diary going on here? If you're asking yourself, why would there be a pumpkin on top of a stack of books? Obviously, decor. That or they'll fly away. I don't know if these are flying books, weightless books, maybe. I don't know. But what I do know is that the pumpkins look good. So, for decor's sake, we shall keep them. And I really want to make sure that there is some depth going on. So I added a pumpkin in the background there. The shelves are a bit deeper than we thought initially, sort of like the plot going on in our drawing. And as we did with the previous shelf, we're going to zoom out and just make sure that the space is taken up appropriately, and if there's any leaves or additional flowers that we need to add to take up the space, we will. All right, and now we are on our third shelf. And here we shall have our witch's hat, which I must say, by the end, it is rather fashionable. So I feel like my head is crooked, so I'm going to the transform, distort, and then I'm just, shifting the top over a little bit so that now it's more vertical and less leaning. It's at this point that I make an artistic decision to have just a little bit of a white outline for the black items. So I do go back up to the cauldron here and add just a little bit of a white outline to help it stand out just a touch. I also do that to the bat on the first shelf that we worked on. Heading back down to our third shelf, we'll be adding the color mint to a pumpkin that will sit behind the witch's hat. And we'll also be doing a nice light pink. And then we will be adding a teal pumpkin as well. Keeping it on the smaller side though, because that color is rather dominant and I don't want it to overtake the piece. Because these colors are so light, I do end up deciding to go with black instead of white, as I had done with some of the previous pumpkins on the other shelves. I do still use white for the darker teal pumpkin at the front, however. And I use black for the mint colored pumpkin in the background. And then heading back to my top layer, which is all the small detail floral elements, I'm adding in some more somehow surviving little white flowers. What kind of flowers are they? I have no clue, but they exist. Okay, now we add another layer. I'm going to work on the other side of this lovely shelf. Now this is where we are going to start adding some glassware, if you will. Some of it might look like it belongs in a chemistry lab or with a Bunsen burner. Or a really awkward perfume bottle. You know, there's so many options. So once I have my white lines down, I am going to add a layer beneath them so I can more easily add my colors. So I'm going to start with the mint green to put down some color. Might be difficult to tell the difference here in this piece until it's filled in, but there is a difference between the white and that mint green blue color. Here I'm doing the salmon, and I'm filling it in on that layer underneath the white outline of the bottles. Once I have these down, I do go in with the darker color, so I use the orange here to create a bit more depth to the liquid inside of the bottle. I also choose the teal to darken up the liquid that's inside of this glass jar. I also, on that same layer, am going to use the light pink to create a cork, because we obviously want to bottle whatever magical potions we've been making and saving it for the right moment. Now, with the color black, we will be drawing on a separate layer a black cat silhouette. I'll admit it takes me a little bit of time to get it right, but I eventually do. Going back to the layer that has my bottles, I end up selecting the pink salmon bottle and moving it closer to the other glass bottle so that way I can see a little bit more of the cat's shape. The cat tail is definitely bothering me. You will see me go through a couple more phases with it. Similar to what I did with the bat, I do add a nose to the cat just so that way it's, you know, suggestive of what kind of creature it is, though I think the whiskers helped. And I'm just painting in real quick some leaves and floral elements. Now it's the time for my cat to shine. So now I am going to fix some of these things up. I could have left the tail but it really did bother me. I was really struggling with it. So I end up trying to erase it, and then I still hated it. So then I ended up just grabbing it with the selection tool and moving it underneath the beaker. Is it factually, anatomically, in reality correct? No, it's not. But I don't care. I can't care anymore. I had to move on. It was time. And obviously, I have to add my books because it's not a bookshelf if you don't have books on each shelf. So I decided to add another book to my bookshelf. And then I, of course, add more floral elements, filling up some of that space that might look a little empty and without detail. And then I add a little bit of white outline and detail to the cat, as I did with the other elements that are painted black on this piece, just to help the cat stand out a little bit, but not too much. All right, and it was at this point I decided it is time to confront the very tippy top of the shelf. Yes, I have those too, but I still have the tippy top. So that's what we do next. This one I tried to not get myself too worked up over the details. Tried to keep it simple, straightforward, stick mostly to books. But yeah, pretty self-explanatory. And the Halloween shelf would not be a shelf if we didn't have a pumpkin, so of course we had to add one. And then we had to add another pumpkin. And then another. And then I had to make sure there was still more books because it is, again, a bookshelf. So I do end up painting this book. I don't keep it. I don't keep it there. I end up erasing it later because I just end up feeling like I feel like this shelf ends up being too full and that it ends up not looking right and it bothers me. So it'll come in time. But right now I'm just doing some details, and as I do that, I realize I need more balance on my top bookshelf. Now, if you're wondering why I didn't just delete the footage here with that book in the background that I say we're going to erase later, it's because there were just too many points of the video that showed it being present. So I decided I'll just leave that and explain to you guys that it doesn't need to stay there. You don't even have to put it there. Just pretend it never happened. I can't, but you can. You can pretend. And then finally, it is at this point when I zoom out in a moment that I realize it's one book too many and I need to erase that book. And I'm glad I did it. It was worth it. It's the right decision. But I still felt like it needed something, so I ended up adding more bottles, different shapes than the ones below. They're also unused and empty, which tells me that the person who owns this bookshelf is planned and prepared for anything in the future, and I admire that about them. Because you just never know when you're going to need a glass container with a stopper. Okay, now we head on down to the next shelf, which is, I believe, the fourth shelf. I am sorry if my math is not mathing. Now, I do paint this little flower pot. By the end, I do make it all black. So if you just want to paint it black to start so you don't have to go through all the extra steps I do later, make it all black. Just solid black. You'll see the design later. I am a firm believer that plants and books inherently belong together, so I had to put a potted plant directly on the shelf where we could see it. Keeping consistent with the design of the other vines, I do go in using that mint green and adding some detail on the leaves. Again, you can skip this part, or if you made the pot black, you can do orange colored eyes. You can make the same face that I'm making now. It's a jack-o'-lantern face, but it will require not black eyes if you've made a black pot. And this is the point where I, for some reason, decide I should add small details to fill up the space, even though I'm not done filling up the space. But it looks good. Okay, this is the part where we add a new layer, and I decide what on earth am I also going to put on this shelf. First and foremost, another pumpkin, because every shelf needs a pumpkin. Just like every shelf needs a book. If you have to rotate your canvas like I do to get better drawing lines and angles, it's okay. And I simply couldn't not add at least one more pumpkin on the shelf. Felt a little sparse. There was only one. So now there's two. And obviously floral elements to help fill the space, keep the theme consistent. Now we are finally going to paint this bad boy black. And then we're going to use white to help outline some of it. I just felt like the other shelves above this one had a black object or item on the shelf, and I really want to go for continuity and consistency and balance. So I decided I could manage to turn this into a black pot and still keep the cute little pumpkin jack-o'-lantern face, but that I just simply needed to invert what was happening. All right, now I'm going to add a layer, make it a clipping mask, and work on the designs for the book spines as I did with the other books previously. Okay, and then this was the moment I realized we have an awkward open space and I want to fill it, so I take the salmon color and I make my little oak fall leaf there. And now we are on our last shelf, the bottom of the shelf. So I felt like the bottom of the shelf needed a bit more greenery and vines, so I do add those in down here. And the way that I decided on their placement was simply just zooming in and out and seeing how the overall shapes were working on the bookshelf piece and just sort of seeing if the eye felt like it was balanced. I also make sure to go back in and use the mint color for the spine of each leaf. So let me just say, I really did struggle to come up with an idea for this bottom shelf. I had done another piece similar to this, and it had less shelves, so it was a little bit easier to fill. But I sort of had to just wing it and hope that I figured it out. So I think I did an okay job. I made a black book, which was something we didn't have on the previous books on the bookcase or the bookshelf, and then I made a picture frame there with a black outline. So I decided to put a ghost in the picture frame, and I again noticed that I had some white in previous shelves, and I thought it would be a nice addition to have some white down here as well, so that we can tie in all the different colors at play. And I wanted the ghost to hold something. I went back and forth between, do I want it to hold a pumpkin or do I want it to hold a book? I went with a pumpkin. I just thought it would be a little bit easier to see from a distance and decipher what it was. You can, of course, pick a different item. This is your piece, this is your shelf. So, what would your ghost or whatever you decide, like what would go inside your frame? And I had to make sure that we started putting other items, and obviously one of them had to be a pumpkin. So I felt like my books were a little lopsided here, so I selected them, used the transform tool, distort, to just lean them the right way, and now they were fixed. I also decided to add one more pumpkin to fill up the space that was remaining on this shelf. Now I'm adding the final details, which are the floral and leaf elements that hopefully enhance the overall effects and images happening. I really enjoyed making this piece for a couple of different reasons. The first being I loved working in the limited palette. I think it helped me get really creative and just like let go a little bit on what my expectations were and the amount of detail that I was expecting myself to paint. But then as well, I really just liked the creative components where I knew it was a bookshelf and it was mine and I got to fill it however I saw fit or what inspired me. And I hope that you enjoyed this project as well. If you end up giving this tutorial a try and you end up posting it on social media, please be sure to tag me. I would love to see what you come up with and what your piece looks like. Alrighty, and here is the finished product. As always, thank you so much for supporting my channel and for spending time with me today. I look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial, and don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and engage. And I'll see you in the next tutorial. Okay? Okay, bye.